Well, this is obviously a different kind of intro than I normally do, but I'm actually trying to set up a challenge for this week. On Friday, I go on a cruise. The cost of this cruise is $1,600, and I have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to try to come up with that money. Obviously, if you know anything about cruising, the cruise is already paid for, but we're trying to see if I can make all that buy-in back in just 3 days of playing. I am going to try to do 5 hours, 3 days in a row. If I can make a little bit over $100 an hour, then the cruise will be paid for. We will prove that poker is live and well, even on the weekdays during the daytime. Right now it's Monday, about 10 a.m. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more vloggy style, and hopefully things go well. I'll let you know at the end. We win a few small pots at the 1-2 table, waiting for a 2-5 table to open up before we arrive at the first interesting hand. With one limp, we're in the cutoff with Jack-9 of clubs. We decide to raise it up to $12 since it is a 1-2 table. The small blind decides to call, the limper folds, so we end up going heads up to a flop, which is King-King-7 with 2 diamonds. When it checks to me, yes, I have a range advantage. I have all the best kings in range. My opponent typically doesn't. So I wouldn't mind a one-off stab here and just give up if we're called because we whiffed pretty hard. But on this one, I choose to check because I'm going to gain a lot of information about my opponent's hand based on the turn action. And when the turn is the 9 of diamonds, so we actually make a pair, my opponent leads out for $17. This is the time where I think raising is the best option. I can get value from 10-8, 8-6, any single diamond holdings. And if my opponent has a king, he's probably going to let me know right now. So I raise it up to $40. I think this raise is good because I think I also get called by worse 9s and bad 7s. And my opponent does not take too long to 3-bet to $200. Well, I don't think single diamond holdings does this. I think it's definitely a made hand, and our opponent just kind of lets us off the hook. And when I fold, my opponent shows 10-4 of diamonds. Not a hand I would recommend calling out of position to a raise, but it is 1-2. Wacky stuff happens. Congrats to this guy. So when we see how wide our friend is playing, and we look down at ace-jack on the button with a button straddle, the small blind limps and the big blind makes it $15. When the cutoff calls, we're definitely 3-betting this one. If our opponent's going to call raises with 10-4 suited, he's going to have a lot of stuff that's just actual trash in his raising range, and we want to punish that with a large 3-bet. I make it $50, definitely massive for a 1-2 game. Not too big compared to his raise size, but when I make it $50, the big blind and the cutoff decide to call. So we end up going 3 ways to a flop, which is King 5-5 rainbow. This is the time where we're going to rep the strong kings in range. When you 3-bet from the button, players usually just put you on like ace-king, ace-queen, pocket aces. A lot of good hands for us on this board. And if I had any of these strong premiums, I would down bet significantly. So when it checks to me, I down bet to $30. And my friend in the big blind decides to make the call. The other player folds. So definitely dicey. We're not really happy to see a call here. On the turn 8 of diamonds, I think we're still just going to try to rep king-queen. Maybe get hands like pocket 7s, 9s, and some middling pocket pairs like that to just get away from it. And for $45, this is the size I would use if I had ace-king on this particular board. But my opponent calls again, and if he's wide enough to play 10-4 suited, he's got a ton of 5s in range, so not happy to see that. The river is the king of clubs. When my opponent checks to me, the only times I would turn my hand into a bluff at this point is if my opponent was a massive thinking player and truly just understood I was trying to rep ace-king the whole time and maybe has the potential to fold a full house. But that doesn't happen too much in live poker, especially not 1-2. I check it back. My opponent announces 9 high. Not sure exactly what the other card is to call 2 bets with, but ace high will beat 9 high, and we take down a pretty big pot, which we feel pretty good about. We win another small pot before this next hand that I think has a lot of educational value. I have king-queen of clubs on the button. When I button straddle, there's 4 limps. I make it $30, and I think this is huge for a 1-2 table, but maybe I'm just not too up to date on the level of calls we're going to get because we get 4 callers for $30, and when the flop is ace of clubs, ace of diamonds, 6 of diamonds, and it checks all the way to me, this is the part where I think we should massively deviate. Normally, I would bet my range here in position. I have all the best aces in range here. But at 1-2 and 1-3, you really don't. I have seen players at this table just limp call with ace-king. They don't even just have the weak aces in range. They have premium aces in range as just limp callers. And with 4 candidates to do that with, we are certainly just giving up on this one. Certainly don't want to just blast away into a brick wall. And I check, turn, there's some betting, river, there's some betting, and one of my opponents has ace 3. Unlikely we're ever going to get that hand to fold, but just thought it was important to document that we don't actually have range advantage on ace high boards specifically at 1-2 and 1-3 at a lot of tables. A final hand of note from the 1-2 streets, I looked down at ace queen of diamonds from the hijack. The under the gun player raised to $7. And this is one of the players I was talking about. I have seen this player limp jacks. I have seen this player limp ace king suited. So I don't have the faintest idea what a $7 raise from the under the gun from this player means. I would 3-bet almost always with this exact holding, but against this player type, we're going to just call here. Could be against aces, the only hand they're willing to open. Maybe against like suited connectors that are trying to name their own price and trying to get to a flop. Either way, when I call, the cutoff calls, button calls, small blind calls, we are 5 ways to a flop, which comes 7-5-4 with 2 diamonds. Definitely not a flop big pairs likes. It is a flop that I certainly like with my hand. And when my opponents check to me, happy that the pre-flop aggressor didn't continue, but I'm definitely going to start pumping this pot up. 2 overs, nut flush draw seems pretty premium. So I bet $21 since it's a 1-2 table, and I'm just trying to get a decent amount of money in the pot while we have a ton of equity. And when I make it $21, the small blind decides to call, and then the pre-flop aggressor also decides to call. So I guess he does have one of those premium over pairs that I was somewhat concerned about. But none of that matters when the turn is the 6 of diamonds. We smack the 4th nuts based on the straight flushes that are possible. And we're not really worried about those, so when it checks to me, we're going to go a little bit bigger on this one. We are certainly hoping that our opponent has a made straight or like a king high flush. We bet $45. And the small blind does not disappoint. They call pretty quickly. Extremely happy to see that one. And the river is really bad. When the king of diamonds shows up, this definitely changes my ability to bomb it. Like, we get to just rip for like $200 if the river's a blank, targeting straights, targeting the king high flush specifically. And now our opponent can't have a king high flush. In fact, the best they could have is a jack high since we have the queen too. This is just really bad for me. So with this run out, we're going to down bet the river from the turn bet, hoping that a straight will just do a crying call. Maybe random single middling diamonds won't be able to get away for $40. And when I put the 40 in, my opponent goes pretty deep into the tank for actually a while. But luckily for me, he does settle on a call and shows just the 3 of diamonds. Says he didn't believe my line, said it didn't make any sense, and claims that he had 6-3 offsuit and actually flopped a straight. So against that hand specifically, maybe I can bet bigger on different rivers. Maybe just the dummy end of the straight is not going to pay off too much anyway. We end up making about $150 across 2 hours at 1-2 before we get called to the 2-5 game. Time for some bigger boy poker. On the first interesting hand, I looked down at ace-jack offsuit from the hijack. I opened to $15, table just open, people are a little bit tighter before we get underway, and the big blind is the only caller. When the flop is 9-9-5 with 2 spades, having the ace of spades is fun. We get some 2 barrel opportunities when we decide to c-bet, but when my opponent checks it to me, I'm just going to check this one back. Small blind can have a random 9 some of the time, and we have a decent amount of showdown value anyway. When the turn is the jack of clubs, I'm very happy to see that. My opponent checks it to me a second time. So now I can pretty confidently rule out any 9. Think a jack also bets this turn card pretty high frequency. But we're certainly going to bet ourselves, hopefully random ace high calls, random 5, 6, 7 spades. Some stuff I get paid by. So I bet $15 and my opponent makes the call. When the river is the 7 of clubs, my opponent checks to me. I'm actually debating between betting and checking this one back. I'm not sure how thin my opponent's willing to call on this one. Not sure when I put the second barrel that any middling pocket pair would stick around. So when I bet $25, I'm really just targeting weaker jacks at this point. And my opponent calls pretty quickly. I think I'm good. I show my hand pretty confidently. And my opponent shows pocket queens. So no 3-bet from the big blind. No bet on the flop. No bet on the turn. We're just calling down with premiums on this table.
I can't beat you. Just kill me.
So with that and a few others like it, stack is definitely dwindling down about $200 at this point before the next hand of note. I look down at pocket aces in the +1 spot. We're going to raise this one up. I make it $20. The button is the only caller on this one, so we end up going heads up to a flop, which is 10-8-3 with 2 clubs. Without the ace of clubs, we're not really going to bet here. I like to check my entire range out of position. I think it gives me a lot of information based on my opponent's actions. And when I check, my opponent bets $25. So over half pot size bet seems like a little bit of protection. Could be top pair, could be flush draws there trying to get folds, and sometimes some straight draws trying to accomplish the same thing. So my opponent most certainly has something when he bets. In hindsight, I think it's a really cool spot for the check raise and just try to get it in 2 or 3 streets. But I seem to not catch that in the moment. I choose to just call, and the turn card is the 10 of hearts. Pretty bad, top card pairing is not great for my aces. And when I check, my opponent bets 40. So smaller in relation to the size of the pot than the flop bet, but we're certainly still not folding aces. You could have flush draws, could have straight draws. Maybe an 8 feels more confident now with the top card paired. Either way, I make the call, and the river is the 9 of spades. Board's definitely getting dicier and more connected. When I check on my opponent, he thinks for a little bit and checks it back. And then shows 10-5 of diamonds.
That hurts.
What a pity.
So yeah, these suited trash 10s are just clobbering me today. And we get our aces cracked. Luckily for me, on the very next shuffle, I look down at pocket queens and I raise to $20. We're going to get a lot of money back on this one. And everyone folds. Still better than getting cracked though. After that, I look down at queen jack of hearts from the hijack. I raised to $15. The cutoff 3 bets to 40. And 3 bets have been quite infrequent at this table. So he probably has a very strong hand. But for only $25, suited Broadway cards, we're just never folding. When I make the call, the flop is king, queen, 9, rainbow with 1 heart. A decent flop for my hand. I got a lot of stuff working for me. Certainly not going to fold to a C bet. But when I check it to my opponent, they check it back. The turn is the jack of spades, and I think this is quite an interesting one. I do think my opponent checks back a lot of the time on this board with exactly ace, king, and pocket aces. So I think I can value bet against those hands specifically. I very much doubt my opponent has pocket 10s or a flopped set based on the fact that he 3-bet and didn't continue on the flop. But again, I bet $40 thinking ace, king, and aces are certainly going to call this bet. And when I make it $40, my opponent does make the call. The river is a beautiful queen of diamonds. Even though I have a full house, I don't think this is one I can just blast away at, because we are still just targeting like single pair holdings on a 4-liner paired board. So I bet $75, pretty small in relation to the size of the pot, and my opponent shows ace, king of spades before folding. Yeah, I actually think it's a fine fold. I think you're losing most of the time. Some of the times your opponents find some bluffs here, but opponent would have to be really good and find like the king jack, jack 9 bluff. We pick up another decent pot before we arrive at the most interesting hand of the night. I looked at a king jack offsuit from the big blind when the under the gun opponent raises to $10. Yes, the min raise. The hijack and button call, I decide this is not a 3-bet spot as I'm going to be out of position. I choose to just call, and we end up going 4 ways to a flop, which is a jack 5-3 with 2 hearts. Pretty good to flop top pair, good kicker. I check as I don't have the betting lead. It checks all the way to the hijack, who bets $30. When it folds back to me, we're certainly not folding top pair, good kicker. Hopefully my opponent has a draw or a weaker jack. We're definitely still sticking around. And when I call, everyone else folds, and we're heads up to a turn card, which is the 10 of diamonds. Not my favorite, jack 10 now beats me. But my opponent bets $80. When action's on me, I think that the third option is best here. I think raising accomplishes a lot of stuff, and my opponent had an ace X of hearts. I get to get a lot of money in while I'm ahead. Maybe the 6-4s have the same idea. As well as the fact my opponent can just have like ace queen, because people don't 3-bet too often on these tables. And if they had that one and just c-bet because it was checked them in position, they would definitely continue on this 10. We get all those to fold. And also just calling down seems kind of weak at this point. Think that it funnels you into playing your opponent's game, and they can kind of play perfectly against you in position based on the run out. So we're going to raise this one up. I make it $225. My opponent does not take too long before making the call. That does not mean he does not have a draw. We expect flush draws and straight draws to continue here. And if my opponent had like a set, we expect him to a raise because the board's pretty dicey. When the river is the 3 of diamonds, I think this is a total dud. This is such a brick. My hand should be good here a high percentage of the time. But I don't think it's strong enough to bet. We want to check and give these missed draws a chance to bluff themselves. And when I check, my opponent thinks for a decent amount of time. He's like shuffling his chips, going back and forth. Think he's going to check back, give up, and Finally, he assembles a bet of like $350. This is the same opponent that checked back with trip 10s against me earlier. So if he's going to check back with value that strong, he is certainly not betting Jack 10 here. Think all sets would have raised turn. So this is kind of funnel just to miss draws here. So I pretty much snap it off. And my opponent has 5-3.
No. I am just going to close my eyes, and when I open them up again, everything is going to be completely back to...
Yeah, it is certainly not a set, but it is certainly good enough to win on this one. This is quite possibly just a very huge punt. I think you can get away in live poker just living by the rule that big bets on the river are typically value. On this board, there are a ton of bluffs that are possible, but do your opponents actually have those bluffs? Some yes, some no. You have to figure out who's who pretty quickly, and this time I thought my opponent had the ability to bluff. Maybe he does, but this time he definitely had it. We get a small rebate before we arrive at the final hand of note. I look down at 8-7 of hearts from the hijack. I make it $25. The big blind is my friend from the last hand. He 3-bets to 80. I mean, quite honestly, it's probably just the revenge wheels turning, because this is probably just a fold almost always. But with 7-8 of hearts, I'm going to make the call here. Heads up to a flop, which is Jack 5-6 rainbow with 1 heart. Open-ended backdoor flush draw. Can't ask for a much better board on this one. And my opponent continues for $75. And similarly to the last hand, I'm going to raise right now. I think my opponent's going to just call here, and I get to see both turn and river for a price that I choose. I get to bomb on any heart or straight completing turn card, and then decide what I want to do on the river based on the run out. But when I make it $200, my opponent takes about 40 seconds to go all in for about $1,500, and we're about even. So that's a very, very, very big bet.
You know why.
Like, I don't even expect aces or kings to just rip here. Like, this feels like straight pocket jacks at this point. Either way, my raise on this flop designed to get me to a cheap showdown actually costs me all my equity, because I have to just fold right now. Don't even get to see the turn for 75. Blunders seem to be compiling on the last few hands of this session. So it's time to rack up, head out. We end up losing $600 on this 5-hour session, which equates to $120 an hour, or 24 big blinds an hour.
Well, that was stupid. I swear, every time I try to make one of these challenges for myself, I absolutely just get buried like the first day. So, realistically, the only hand that I really dislike is the 5-3 hand. Like, we just beat so much. Like, this player had been caught bluffing. Sucks that he had it this time. After thinking about it a little bit while I was at the table, I just kind of also realized that, like, if someone's unwilling to bet trips with a bad kicker, they're probably not willing to throw out the huge bluff. And yeah, this guy's been caught bluffing, but they're not like 300 plus bluffs. So maybe that's a very easy exploit where we can just like fold, because he's probably just going to give up with missed draws. He's probably not going to actually throw it in there. But I don't know. Let me know what you think about that one in the comments. And we have 2 more days to try to get it back. So hopefully we can run it back in the next 2 days. Now we're going to try to make 22 in 2 days, which is definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible. So I guess we'll see. And thank you for making it to this point, and I will see you on the next one.